Harry, one of the things we discover both in Luke and Acts is that Luke seems to be concerned about geography. I think not in terms of geography lessons, but as a kind of organizing principle to bring his themes together. And for these passages we're looking at now, Jesus is on a very long and somewhat convoluted trip to Jerusalem. And as he goes, my sense is that he takes time to instruct his disciples on some of the main themes that he thinks they will need to remember as they move from his presence to his presence in heaven. And we see some of those themes here. He tells them how they are to confess him, even when they're under threat, and some sense that discipleship will never be easy. There's more contemplation about the relationship between wealth and poverty, with the fool who puts all his stuff together and says, "Now my soul, take your rest." And Jesus has God say, God speaks again here, incidentally. God doesn't speak often directly. In God's most direct way, "You stupid fool." What are the themes, you think, that Luke is holding out for the nascent church to be thinking about as Jesus gives them these kind of parting instructions?
Right, you've hit a couple of major things that are going on here, and it's rather difficult in these chapters of Luke, in the center of the long journey to Jerusalem, to see a simple thematic continuity. Luke seems to bounce back and forth, and he's probably picking up material from different sources. There's material in here, for instance, that reminds us of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, the lilies of the field passage, for instance, in Luke 12:22 and following, that we find in Matthew 6. So Luke is getting material from different places and sort of organizing it here in a kind of spiraling way. But he does seem to touch on a few key things, and you've mentioned them. One, the cost of discipleship. You have to reckon what it's going to take to be a follower of Jesus. And sometimes it's a very heavy cost. A little later on, we'll hear that you have to hate your fathers and your mothers. In Luke 14:25 and 26, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself cannot be my disciple." That's pretty heavy stuff.
Very heavy stuff.
And it's much more pointed than the parallel in Matthew 10. Which says, if someone loves father and mother more than me, you can't be my disciple.
This is hugely different.
This is one of those points where you begin to wonder which is the original version of Jesus saying, and I think the Lucan one is probably
it. Because it's easier to see why you'd want to tone it down than rather to make it.
This has a little more punch.
Mean
so,
as it is.
In any case, this is one of the themes that runs through these chapters.
Don't preach that for Mother's Day.
I
want to warn you on that one.
It wouldn't be a temptation. The other theme is wealth and poverty, and again, this is interwoven. And so we have the radical call in Luke 14:33 as part of one of these sections on the cost of discipleship. "So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." That's pretty strong stuff.
That's very strong stuff.
And then, we'll have to keep that in mind when we see some examples of Jesus encountering sinners who've involved themselves in the misuse of wealth. And does he always articulate that call? That seems to be, in the Catholic tradition, would be called a counsel of perfection.
Yes.
Which is somehow to be qualified in a pastoral sense when you're actually dealing with concrete individuals. And in some ways, Luke exemplifies that tendency to have the strong ideal out there, but then to have
what you actually do with it is somewhat more modest. Well, the John the Baptist things. Don't stop being a tax collector, but stop extorting money.
Either that or Luke is just inconsistent.
Right.
Consistency being the
hobgoblin of little gospels.
Right. You mentioned the parable of the rich fool, and that's certainly in Luke chapter 12. An example story, right?
Hugely,
keeping things in the right perspective and not investing yourself.
Not that you can't have anything, but if you invest your soul in what you have, then you've lost it.
And you can see how Luke, there's a bit of an artfulness in the way Luke juxtaposes some of these passages. So he takes the story of the rich fool, which we don't have in the other synoptic gospels, and puts it right next to the don't worry about clothing, like the lilies of the field passage. So the two complement one another
very nice.
In a rather interesting way. And Jesus also reminds his disciples that, it's not easy going. You're going to cause some division. You are going to be setting some boundaries by following in my footsteps. People are not going to be all harmony and light around you.
Exactly.
In Luke chapter 12:49.
I think part of it is we lose first century context so easily. I mean, my mother and my father and brothers and sisters all went to church with me. But when I talk to people in first generation Christians, hate may be a strong word, but real family division takes place when one leaves Confucianism or Buddhism or any other religion or non-religion at all. The annoyed atheist parents whose son, in a case we both know, wandered off to seminary, they never did figure that out.
Right. In any case, these themes will be picked up again in Acts, and the divisions that are caused
Absolutely.
by people who respond positively to Jesus' message is something that Luke will be concerned
Yeah.
with throughout.
Yeah, all the way through.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got this fascinating story in here about following and not following, which is a story of a banquet in the middle of chapter 14. Somebody throws a banquet, and then all the usual invitees, expected invitees, don't show up. And so what happens, and what does that mean for us in terms of Jesus' ministry and message?
Here we have another one of Jesus' well-known parables,
Yeah.
and we have it attested for us in three different sources, two in the canonical New Testament, here in Luke 14, and also in Matthew 22, and then also in the non-canonical Gospel of Thomas. And in each case, it seems to have a slightly different point, a slightly different focus, which illustrates the principle that we saw before of parables in particular having multiple possible meanings that can be actualized in different kinds of contexts. Just for contrast, Matthew in Matthew 22 seems to be focusing on this as a parable of life in the church. Matthew is big on
Very
the
huge on
church.
life in the church, yeah.
And as a kind of coda to the parable, we have the little story of the wedding garment that's askew.
Right.
And so it's cast in Matthew as a wedding feast
Yeah.
rather than a general
Yeah.
banquet. And someone gets in who doesn't have the appropriate
Right.
garment and, is going to be punished for
My
it.
wife's worst fear of going out to dinner with me, but,
Right.
missed the dress code note entirely.
Yeah. Luke doesn't seem to have that concern. That is, not thinking about church order and sorting out the wheat from the chaff within the church, but really focusing on one of his key themes, a kind of radical inclusiveness, a radical compassion for those who are poor and needy. So the story goes, someone gave a great dinner, not a marriage
Right.
feast, but
Right.
just a dinner,
Yeah.
an ordinary banquet, and invited lots of people, all of whom have good excuses. And then, the master sends out twice his slaves to get people to fill the places at this banquet. So one of the things I think Luke has in mind is his reading of salvation history. There is a reflection on the theme that's going to occupy Acts of the relationship between this new community of believers
Yeah.
and those who reject.
Yeah.
And we've seen this before at a couple of points in Luke, that elements of the teaching and action of Jesus foreshadow what's going to happen in the life of the church. And I think this parable is in some ways structured to foreshadow
Nice,
that.
nice.
And at the same time, it's structured to reinforce what Luke has been talking about in many cases, that the gospel is focused on compassion, on
Yeah.
outreach, and
To the
and
surprising
to the
ones.
marginalized.
Yeah.
And so I think that's here too.
Yeah.
So once again, we have this complexity about parables, the multiple facets that you can see, even within the Lucan context. And I think what's interesting about Luke is that he is sensitive to the multiple meanings of parables in a way that I think Matthew is not.
I think that's right.
Matthew tends to allegorize the parables, and
This means that, and this means
that's
the
right.
other, yeah.
That's right. And Luke is a little reticent to
I
do
think
so
that's
in many
true. I
cases.
think that's
And
true.
I think this is an example of that.
Yeah. Is there any way in which you think first century people read this as the latecomers were the Gentiles and the first two sets of invitations went to the Jews, and now at last we're bringing the Gentiles in?
It could be Jews, Samaritans, and Gentiles,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
who knows what.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is that structuring of the story of the church in Acts, that the message goes out first to the people in Jerusalem, and then to the Samaritans, and then finally to the Gentiles. And there's resistance almost at every step of the way.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the Spirit moves things along and moves it toward that greater boundary. Remember, that's part of the kind of overall structuring of the whole narrative of Luke and Acts, to give it a kind of geographical framework that focuses
Larger
on
and larger,
larger and larger.
yeah.
Well, in the gospel, it focuses on
starts in,
Jerusalem.
yeah.
And then everything winds up there, and then it's like the Big Bang, right?
Exactly,
You have the
yeah, the
resurrection, and
circles go out, yeah.
things go out,
Yeah.
and Luke draws the stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jerusalem,
Absolutely.
Samaria,
Yeah,
Rome, etc.
absolutely.
Or Antioch and Rome. And so there's something of that, I think, hinted at in this parable.
So at the end of the story, when Paul's in Rome, end of Luke and Acts, Is Jerusalem still in, or have we left Jerusalem behind and we're now a gospel for the Gentiles only?
It's rather interesting, it seems to me, that the book of Acts ends in a way that's similar to the parable of the Good Samaritan. Not the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son.
Prodigal son.
And we're going to be talking
Yeah,
about that
yeah.
next, so I'll wait until we
Okay,
talk about
okay. Fair enough.
the prodigal son before giving
Fair
you an
enough.
answer
All
there.
right.
But it's interesting on Jerusalem that in the context of the parable of the Great Supper in Luke 13, we have the saying of Jesus about Jerusalem as a place where prophets are killed.
Yeah.
Picking up that theme of Jesus as a prophet and the successor
Yeah.
of the prophets, Jerusalem is the focal point of his ministry, something that we've heard about on this
Absolutely.
journey to Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
And Jerusalem is somehow standing under some sort of judgment
Yeah.
because of its rejection of
And
Jesus.
his lament at the time of the
That's
triumphal entry, which we'll come to in a few minutes.
Right, right. So there is that element in Luke, but I don't think it's quite as final as some would make it to
Okay.
be.
All right. Thank you.